Let's talk about 19th century India. It was a time of this remarkable cultural and intellectual rebirth, a period just brimming with promise. But what if that very progress, that incredible flowering of new ideas, also carried the seeds of a deep and lasting conflict?
It really forces you to ask a tough question, doesn't it? What happens when a golden age of progress isn't golden for everybody? What if the very thing that drives that progress also creates some of the deepest divisions a society can possibly face? Well, that's the paradox we're here to unpack today.
So, our story really kicks off right after the huge upheaval of 1857. As things started to settle down under the direct rule of the British Raj, a totally new social order began to form. And with it, a new kind of Indian.
With Calcutta basically becoming the new economic engine of the Raj, things changed, and they changed fast. Western-style education, focused on science and philosophy, started to create this brand new professional middle class. Now, these weren't your traditional princes or peasants. We're talking about doctors, lawyers, and administrators who had a completely different way of seeing the world. And, this is key, they had a powerful new tool to share their ideas. I mean, just think about the power of this for a second. By the late 19th century, newspapers were reaching over 100,000 people. This wasn't just some small, closed-off circle of intellectuals anymore. No, this was a public sphere in the making, where totally new ideas about society, religion, and culture could be debated on a scale that had never been seen before.
So, you've got this new class and this new public forum. The stage was absolutely set for an incredible explosion of intellectual and cultural activity. It was a true renaissance, a flowering of new work in pretty much every field you can imagine.
And wow, what a flowering it was. Modern Indian novels and poetry just exploded onto the scene. You had groundbreaking science from people like Jagadish Chandra Bose, a true pioneer of radio science. But this energy wasn't just in the arts and sciences. It was aimed right at society itself. A huge push for social reform kicked off, tackling fundamental issues like women's rights and the caste system.
This era produced some absolute intellectual giants. On the left, you see Swami Vivekananda, a reformer who argued for a more universal, humanistic vision of Hinduism. And on the right, the incredible Rabindranath Tagore, a poet, philosopher, a true humanist, who really became the intellectual conscience of the entire subcontinent.
And believe me, this push for reform was real. You had thinkers like Tarabai Shinde writing these blistering critiques of gender inequality, just calling out the treatment of women and fiercely arguing for their rights. This wasn't some fringe idea. It was a central debate of this Renaissance.
And if you need just one single fact to capture the absolute peak of this intellectual mountain, well, this is it. Rabindranath Tagore became the first non-European ever to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. It was this huge moment of global recognition for this cultural rebirth. It was an incredible moment of global recognition. But, and this is a huge but, beneath that glittering surface, a deep flaw was starting to widen. This rebirth was not for everyone. And this, right here, is where our story takes a sharp and really difficult turn.
You see, for all its brilliance, this Renaissance had a fatal flaw. It was built on an incredibly narrow foundation, and its promises of progress, well, they just weren't reaching the vast majority of people. So who was really a part of this movement? The numbers, well, they're pretty stark. It was overwhelmingly an upper caste Hindu phenomenon, making up 70% of its beneficiaries. Meanwhile, Bengali Muslims, lower caste Hindus, farmers, and workers, the vast majority of the population, they were almost completely left out. This wasn't a renaissance for all, it was a renaissance for a select few.
And this was the fatal gap. The Renaissance was urban, it was elite, and it was overwhelmingly upper caste Hindu. For the vast majority, Muslims, farmers, city workers, this so-called golden age might as well have been happening on another planet. And instead of bridging old divides, this exclusive progress began to carve out new and much more dangerous ones.
And this exclusivity, well, it had a consequence. When people feel left out of the vision for the future, they often start looking to the past for their identity. And that led to a powerful backlash in the form of religious revivalism, which would end up setting communities on a collision course.
So what exactly is religious revivalism? Basically, it was a direct reaction against the Western-influenced Renaissance. Instead of embracing reform, it called for a return to a pure religious past, a past that was frankly often idealized and pretty imaginary. It was a defensive move, and it often led to some very hard-line reactionary positions on social issues. And you can see how this path to conflict escalated, and fast. In the 1870s, you have movements like the cow protection societies creating immediate friction with Muslims and lower caste Hindus. Then, a British court ruling inflamed tensions in 1888, and the stage was set. By 1893, these tensions just exploded into the first major Hindu-Muslim communal riots. The abstract ideas had become tragically, violently real.
And this gave rise to a new and incredibly destructive force: communalism. This wasn't just about religious differences anymore. It was about seeing society through a purely religious lens, where your group's interests were in direct and hostile competition with another's.
So all of these currents, the Renaissance, its exclusivity, the revivalist backlash, they all fed directly into the biggest question of the age. What is the nation? And two very different competing answers began to emerge.
On one side, you had secular nationalism. This was inspired by things like the French Revolution, and it imagined an inclusive, egalitarian identity where your loyalty was to the nation itself, with a clear separation of religion and state. But on the other side, a religious nationalism popped up as a reaction to British influence. It based national identity on religious affiliation, which by its very nature could alienate anyone who didn't belong to the majority faith.
Now, out of that secular, Renaissance-minded middle class came the Indian National Congress in 1885. And funnily enough, a British civil servant, Alan Octavian Hume, actually played a key role in founding it. This organization was very much a product of that articulate upper caste group that we were talking about earlier.
But here's the thing. Its initial goals were actually pretty limited. It wasn't about overthrowing the British Raj, not at first. It was meant to be a kind of debating chamber, a place for this new elite to voice their grievances and ask for more privileges within the system, not to tear the whole system down.
Meanwhile, the Muslim community was on a totally different trajectory. At first, they were hesitant about Western education, and they found themselves falling behind professionally. Leaders like Syed Ahmed Khan started pushing for change, encouraging modern education, but also urging loyalty to the Raj. This led to separate political organizations focused on their community's own needs. And the British? Well, they definitely took note, especially when the 1872 census revealed that Muslims were actually the majority in Bengal.
And so that's where we're left. A brilliant Renaissance created a modern, forward-thinking class. But its own exclusivity fueled a powerful and divisive countermovement. The question that would define the future was this: how would these two competing visions of a nation, one inclusive and secular, the other exclusive and religious, battle it out for the soul of the subcontinent and shape the next 100 years of conflict and creation?